Hi, my name is Sheridan Pinheiro and I'm a document automation consultant in the Contract Express Professional Services team. Thank you for joining me today and welcome to our webinar on Contract Express approval processes. Today I'm going to show you how to set up internal approval processes for your organisation using Contract Express. I'll start by showing you how to enable and configure the approvals in the Contract Express interface. I'll then show you how to set up triggers for your approvals within your Contract Express templates and how to set up the approval steps within the Contract Express interface. I'll also show you how to edit or delete approval steps and manage the approval order. And finally, I'll demonstrate some approval processes from the point of a user completing a document and requesting approval to the point where the designated approver either approves or rejects the document generated by the user. Approval processes can be set up by Contract Express users who are admins or authors. General users are not able to configure the approvals, but they can request approvals for documents they have created, and they can also be designated as an approver so that they can approve or reject documents created by other users. So let's begin by enabling approvals in your Contract Express environment and configuring the approval statuses. Once you've logged into your Contract Express environment, we want to start by clicking on the Admin tab. And under the License heading in the left-hand panel, we want to click Features. Check this checkbox beside Approvals to enable them in your environment. You can then click Manage Statuses to customize the names of each approval step. So, for example, you may want to change rejected to not approved, or you may want to change revoked to withdrawn, depending on the terminology that your organisation prefers. If you do make changes here, remember to click the Save button in the top right of the screen. Now you're ready to set up your first approval process. I'm going to start by demonstrating a basic approval process, and I'll then show you another approval process using some different options that are available. So I've created this very simple template and it only includes 6 variables. And by viewing the questionnaire structure in the dictionary editor, you can see that the user is asked whether the risk team can approve changes to 3 different clauses. These have been set up as yes/no variables. Where the answer to any of these questions is yes, the user is then asked which risk group should approve the changes. This is a single select variable, allowing the user to select only one option. And finally, the user is asked to input a date. I have previously uploaded this template to my Contract Express environment. So when I go back to my Contract Express interface and I click on the Templates tab, I can find my template in the list of all templates, which by default appears in alphabetical order. I now need to click on the template name to access the template details. I first need to make sure that my template is live and that it has been shared with the relevant users. Then, under the Workflow heading in the left-hand panel, I need to click on Approval Steps. To add a new approval step, I can click the Add Approval Step button in the top right of the screen. I then need to give my approval step a unique name by entering this in the title field. I can then select whether I would like the approval to automatically start once the questionnaire is complete. If I leave this unchecked, the user generating the document will need to manually start the approval process once they have completed the questionnaire, and I'll show you how this works shortly. Next, I can choose whether I want the approver to be able to edit the questionnaire once they receive the request for approval. If this is left unchecked, the approver will only be able to view a read-only copy of the questionnaire before either accepting or rejecting the approval request. I can now use the variables I created in my template to determine when this approval step is applicable. It is either always applicable, so that the approval process applies to this template regardless of how the questionnaire is answered, or it's never applicable, so that the approval process never applies to this template, or it is applicable depending on a specific rule being satisfied. An organisation may wish to choose that an approval step is never applicable, where they wish to temporarily switch off an approval process for a particular template without actually deleting the approval step. Then when the approval process needs to be switched back on again, the only change that needs to be made to the approval step is to make it either always applicable or applicable dependent on a rule. I'm going to choose that option for this approval step. So in this case, I want my approval to become applicable if the user answers yes to any of the yes/no questions in my template, asking whether risk can approve a certain clause. If I click into this drop-down box here, you can see that a list of the variables included in my template appears, allowing me to select the variable that triggers the applicability of the approval. In the next drop-down, I can select the relevant operator. Either my variable is equal to a particular answer, not equal to that answer, greater than or less than that answer, greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. My answer to the question then needs to be included in the final text box here. I can click the plus symbol if I want to add additional rules, and I can choose "and" in this drop-down here if both rules must be satisfied to trigger applicability, or I can change this to "or" where the approval becomes applicable dependent on any one of the rules being satisfied. If I want to remove a rule, I can click the cross symbol to the right of the rule. So I'm going to select trigger 1 yes no as my first trigger variable, choose the equal sign in the next drop down, then choose true in the final drop down. I'm then going to click my plus symbol to add another rule. I want to leave "or" in this drop down so that either of these rules can trigger applicability of the approval. Then I'm going to select trigger 2 yes no as my next trigger variable, choose the equal sign in the next drop down, and then choose true in the final drop down. Then I'll follow the same process to add my next rule, which is dependent on trigger 3 equaling true. And again, I want to choose "or" in the drop down here. Moving on to the next section of our approval step, we now want to configure the rule or rules for when the approval step becomes required as opposed to just applicable. Basically, the difference here is that although an approval step may be applicable because certain conditions are satisfied, the document may not actually require approval from an approver, or may only require approval if certain conditions are satisfied. So looking at this template, my approval becomes applicable if the user says that the risk team can approve changes to any of the 3 clauses. That is, they answer yes to any one of the 3 yes/no variables in the questionnaire. But I don't want the approval request associated with this approval step to actually be sent to the approver unless the user chooses risk team 1 as the relevant approver. I set up the variable allowing the user to select the appropriate risk team to approve the document with 4 possible answers, being risk team 1, risk team 2, risk team 3, and risk team 4. So I have previously set up additional separate approval steps for each different risk team for this template, so the approval request will go to the appropriate risk team, depending on the answers to the questionnaire. The additional approval steps are identical to the approval step we're now setting up for risk team 1, except that the approval request will be sent to one of the other risk teams using a different email address. The approval step for risk team 4 is also set up slightly differently for reasons which I'll explain shortly, and I'll show you how to manage the order of these approval steps later in the webinar. So, going back to my interface, when setting up the required section of my approval step, I have the same options as are available for the applicable section. The approval can either always be required, meaning that approval will always be requested from the relevant approver regardless of how the questionnaire is answered, or never required, or required depending on a certain rule. An organisation may choose to make an approval step never required, where they are using the approval step just to determine whether the document is compliant with these applicability rules, but where they don't actually need an approver to approve the document. This is mainly useful for reporting purposes because the Analytics tab, which can be found by scrolling back up the page up here, records when an approval step's applicability has been triggered, as well as approvals received and rejected. So in this case, I want my approval step to be required dependent on a certain rule, being that the user has selected the approver to be Risk Team 1 when answering the questionnaire. I'll choose Risk Group Approving Select as my trigger variable here, choose the equal sign in the next drop-down, and I'll type Risk Team 1 as my answer. You can see that predictive text doesn't appear when using a text selection variable in this rule, so you may have to refer back to your template to make sure you type the correct text into this field. Again, I can add additional rules here by clicking the plus symbol, and I can remove rules by clicking the cross symbol to the right of the rule. Next, I'm going to set up my default approvers. An approver can either be an individual user, a group of users, or can be selected by variable. If I select user here, I can start typing the relevant user's email address, which they use to log into Contract Express, and predictive text will suggest some possibilities for me to select. Then I can just click the name of the user I wish to appoint as my approver, and it is populated in my text field here. Alternatively, if you have set up a user group through the admin tab, you can select group in the first drop down here, and then you can start typing the group name. And again, predictive text will suggest some possible answers for groups which you can set as an approver. The third option here, to select variable as the approver type, will be demonstrated later on in this webinar for the second approval process I'm going to demonstrate. You can click the Add Approver button here to add additional approvers or approver groups, and you can remove approvers by clicking the cross symbol to the right of the approver name. You can see here that you can also add data-driven approvers, where a particular approver is sent the approval request depending on the answers to certain questions in the questionnaire. You can add more than one data-driven approver, or you can add a combination of data-driven and non-data-driven approvers in this section. My second demonstration will also include an example of data-driven approvers. But in this case, we have one approver who is a user. Next, we need to set up the notification emails associated with this approval step. You can see here under the notifications heading that separate notification emails need to be set up for approval requests, requests that are forwarded, approved requests, and rejected requests. You can choose whether to send a request email to the primary approver only or all approvers if you have more than one. Now we need to enter a subject and some body text for each notification email. Note that the emails will only be sent if both the subject and the body sections contain some text. If either of these sections are left blank, no email will be sent. So in the example I have set up here, I'll type the text approval request into my subject line. And then in the body text section, I'll type, "Hi, please review and approve my document, dated." And then I'm going to choose to add a variable into my body text by clicking this Add Variable option here. And I'm going to choose my date variable from my template. Moving to the next line, I'm going to choose another variable here, this time my approval comments metadata variable. And I'll sign off by saying thanks. So you can see that when I click the add variable in the top right of each section, I can select to insert either a variable from my template into the email or a metadata variable. In this case, I've inserted my date variable from my template, and I've inserted the metadata variable approval comments, which will insert any comment the user enters into the comment box when they are requesting the approval. And I'll demonstrate this for you in a moment. Next, I want to click on the Forward tab and enter my subject and body text for forwarded approval notifications. This time my subject is Approval Request Forwarded. And I will insert the same body text as I did for the request notification email so that whoever the approval has been forwarded to receives the same message as the person who received the original approval request, including the same template and metadata variables. As you can see, I can just copy by clicking Control-C from the request email notification, and then I can paste using Control-V into my forwarded notification email. When I click my Approve tab, my subject is going to be Document Approved, and my body text is going to be The document is approved. Then I will insert my approval comments variable, this time which will be comments from the approver to the user who requested approval. And then I'm going to insert my sign off. And I'll add another variable here which will put my approver name into the body text there. So now I'm going to do my reject notification email. Document rejected will be my subject. My body text will say the document has been rejected. Going to a new line, I'll again insert my approval comments metadata variable and then my sign off, including my approver name metadata variable. Once I'm happy that my approval step is complete, I need to scroll back up to the top of the page and click the Save button. My approval step is now successfully saved and it will be applied to the next document generated by any user using this template. I'm now going to show you how you can manage the order of approval steps. So going back to my approval steps screen, we have 4 different approval steps set up for this template, one for each risk team. You can see in the order column that they are all listed as number 1 in the approval step order. This means that they all operate simultaneously or in parallel. Now, my template has been set up so that only one approver needs to be selected for any questionnaire that is completed. However, if I were to include some additional variables in this template, allowing the user to select an additional risk team required to approve this document, the 2 approval requests would be sent to the 2 different approvers at the same time when the questionnaire is completed. So going back to my approval steps screen, if I want to change the order of my approval steps, I can click this Manage Order button. Here we can see that all my approval steps run in parallel. To change this so that my approval steps are triggered sequentially or one after the other, I need to click this plus symbol here, and I will now be able to drag and drop an approval step into the new section that has appeared on the screen. I can continue to click the additional plus symbols to add more sections into the order of my approval steps until they all run one after the other. Or I can add more than one approval step to each section so that certain steps run in parallel and others run sequentially. If I change my mind at any point, I can just drag and drop my approval steps back to their original position or to a different position in the different sections. Changing the order of my approval steps to run sequentially means that the approval steps appearing in the second section of my approval order will not be triggered until the approval steps in the first section of my approval have completed. That is, when the request has been approved by the initial approver. If the initial approver was to reject the request, this second approval step would not be triggered. The user would simply be notified that the request has been rejected, and they'd need to start the questionnaire again to restart the approval process. Sequential approval steps are useful, for example, where the first approval is required from a line manager. Then only if the line manager approves the document will a second approval request be sent to the risk team, and so on up the hierarchy of approvers. Make sure that you click the Save button at the top right of the Manage Order screen before you navigate away from the page if you have made any changes. When I click back to my approval steps page, you can now see that the numbers in the order column have changed to correspond with the sections I added in the Manage Order screen. In this case, though, there is no need to order the approval steps sequentially, so I can click back into the Manage Order screen and reorder all of my approval steps so they run in parallel in the first section of my approval order. Then click Save. I'll now log out of my Contract Express admin account, and I'm going to log in as a user so I can demonstrate what requesting approval looks like. So as a user, you can see that my admin tab and my analytics tab have disappeared. And to create a new document, I'm going to click the Documents tab and then the New Document button in the top right of the screen. Here is a list of categories and templates that have been shared with me as the user. And in this case, I need to choose my template name, which is the Approvals Test template, and my questionnaire will open. I can see my 3 yes/no questions on screen. So I'm going to answer no for the first and second questions. And you can see that there is no change to the questionnaire. However, when I answer yes to the third question, my approval process becomes applicable. And you can see my question asking me to select the appropriate risk team to approve the changes appears. Remember, I need to answer Risk Team 1 for my approval process for Risk Team 1 to be required. But to start with, I'm going to select one of the other options, Risk Team 4, and click Save and Continue. Note that the approval step for Risk Team 4 has been set up as applicable depending on the same rules as for the other approval steps, but it has been set to never required so that no request will be sent to an approver in this case. I'll now select a date and click Save and Close. On my document overview screen, under the Approvals heading, I can see that my document is marked as compliant for each approval step. This means that the approvals are applicable because the rule for applicability has been satisfied for each when I answered yes to the third yes/no question. But they are not required because that rule was not satisfied when I selected Risk Team 4, where approval is never required, instead of Risk Team 1, where approval is required if Risk Team 1 is selected as the approver. So here, no approval process has been started, and my document is available for download. I'll now click on the Edit Questionnaire button, and I'll change my answer to the last question to be Risk Team 1, so that my approval required condition is satisfied and will trigger the approval process. Now when I click Save and Close and the document overview screen appears, you can see that under the Approvals heading, my document is now marked as required for the Risk Team 1 approval step. meaning an approval is required for this document. If I click the arrow beside the name of the approval step, I can see who the primary approver is, and if there are any other approvers, I can see who they are. I can also see in the details section of the page that my status has updated to requires approval. Because I set up my approval step to require a manual start to the approval process rather than an automatic start, I need to click the request button to trigger my notification email to be sent to the relevant approver and begin the approval process. If I had chosen to start the process automatically, this button would not appear, and instead my document would be marked as waiting under the approvals heading and awaiting approval under the status. When I click the request button, a window pops up allowing me to enter a comment for the approver. This comment will appear in the notification email to the approver where we inserted the approvals comment metadata variable into the body text for the email. So I'll type in here my comment to the approver. And then I'll click the request button. Now you can see that under the approvals heading, my document has been marked as waiting for the Risk Team 1 approval step, and my document status has updated to awaiting approval. You can also see that my document is not available for download. It will only become available for download by the user when approval has been granted. But this can be changed in the profile settings for your environment if you'd rather that the document is available for download by the user either in Word format or as a PDF file prior to the approval being granted. I'll now log out of my Contract Express user account. And I'm going to go into the approver's email inbox. And what I will see here is that the notification email requesting approval will be received. Here it is here. So here is the date that I input into my notification email using the date variable from my template. And here is the comment that I entered as the user when I was requesting approval. I can then click on this link here to be taken to the document overview page for the document the user has requested approval for. I'm going to need to log in as the approver. I can now see that under the approvals heading, I can either approve, reject, or forward the approval request. I can also download the document as a PDF and review it. And I can click the Edit Questionnaire button to view a read-only copy of the questionnaire. This is because I didn't select to allow the approver to edit the questionnaire when I set up the approval step. If I select to forward the approval request, I can select a user or group to forward the request to, and I can enter a comment to be included in the notification email. The person the request has been forwarded to will then also be able to approve, reject, or forward the request. If I select to reject the document, I can include a message to my user who has requested approval in my comments box. And when I click the reject button, I can see that my approval step is now marked as rejected, and my status has also changed to rejected. So now I'll log out of the Approver's Contract Express account, and I'm going to go to my user's email inbox, so the user who has requested approval. You'll see in a moment that I will receive my notification email that my request for approval has been rejected. So here is my comment from the approver. And when I click on the link in the email and log into Contract Express as the original user who is requesting approval, I'm taken to the document overview page, and I can see that the approval request has been rejected. My status is also rejected, and my document remains unavailable for download. The user will need to start the questionnaire again if they wish to create a new document and restart the approval process. So I'll start a new questionnaire by again clicking the Documents tab and clicking the New Document button, and again selecting the Approvals Test template. I'll again answer my questions so that my approval process is triggered. And I'll save and close. I'll again click the Request button on my document overview screen, insert my comment again, and click the Request button. And again, I'm going to log out as the user because I need to receive approval before I can go any further. So now when I go back into my approver's email account, I can see that my second approval request has been received. And I can click on the link again to go to the document details page, logging in as the approver. This time, I'm going to approve the document by clicking the Approve button, and I'll insert a comment for the user who has requested approval. And then I'll click the Approve button. My document is now marked as approved under the Approvals heading for the approval step for Risk Team 1, and my status has changed to Ready. So I'll again log out of the approver's account because I have finished my part of this process as the approver. And I'll go back to the user's email inbox to receive the approved notification. So here is my approved notification here, and my comment from the approver. And now when I click the link to access the document details page and log in as the user, I can see that my document is now approved, my status has changed to Ready, and my document is now available for download in Word as an unrestricted Word document. Scrolling down on the document details page, you've got the history section here. So this displays the history of a document, including all of the steps in any approval process. So you can click on the arrows beside each step in the history section to see the details here. So that includes status changes, when the approval was requested and by who, including the comments that were sent to the approver, when approval was approved and by who, including the comments. And you can also see any changes to the questionnaire answers. I'm now going to log out as my user, and I'm going to log back in as an admin user. You can also view and access any approval requests sent to you as an approver by clicking on the Tasks tab up here. and then the Approvals tab. Only in progress approvals will appear here. Once the document has been approved or rejected, it will disappear from the Tasks tab. Now I'll show you how you can make changes to your approval steps. So if we go back to our approval steps for the approvals test template, I'm going to make changes to my Risk Team 1 approval step. And I may have decided that I would like my approval process to automatically start instead of clicking the request button, and that I would like my approver to be able to edit the questionnaire. And I may also decide I want to change the text in my notification email. So instead of asking to approve my document, I may want to include a metadata variable here that will insert the contract name. Then I need to scroll back to the top of the page and click the Save button, and that will update my approval step. Changes can be made to approval steps at any time by admins or author users and will apply to all subsequent approval processes for the relevant template. If I wanted to delete an approval step, I can do this on the approval steps screen by clicking into the checkbox to the left of the relevant approval step name and then clicking the delete button in the top right of the screen. A warning appears asking if I'm sure I want to delete this item. I can click cancel here if I've changed my mind, or I can go ahead and click the delete button. You can see that my approval step has now been successfully deleted and it has disappeared from my list of approval steps. I'm going to now move on to demonstrate my second approval process using different options. This time I'm using a one-page employment agreement template, and our approval process will need to go to a particular HR manager based on the employment type selected by the user and the employee's income amount. First, we'll need to create some additional variables for our template and add them to the questionnaire. Then we'll go through and set up the approval step in the Contract Express interface, and finally, I'll demonstrate requesting approval for this template and the approval being either granted or rejected. So my employment agreement template is open in Word. I'm going to expand my dictionary editor here to show you what the questionnaire structure looks like. So I've got most of the variables created for my template, and I've sorted them into an employee details group, including my employee salary variable, and an employment details group, which includes my employment type variable, both of which are triggers for my approval process. I'm now going to create the variable we need to enable the user to select a specific manager as the approver. So I'm going to add a new variable into my questionnaire structure under the employment details group. And I'm going to call it approver:ID. This is a simple text variable. I'm then going to click on the Constraints tab and change the mask to Search User. This will allow the user to select from a list of users set up in their Contract Express environment. So I'm just going to insert that variable into my template. I'm placing it at the end of my template, but it doesn't really matter where you put it. It can go anywhere. I'll now create another new variable, which will be the trigger for the approval. So this one's going to be called approval trigger, and this time it's going to be a computable. So it can remain in my unallocated variable section of my questionnaire because there won't be a question associated with this. It will calculate on its own, being a computable. In the computation tab, my rule will be employee salary is more than 100,000. I also need to ensure that the Save in Session checkbox is checked for each computable I create for this template, so that Contract Express does the calculation as the questionnaire is answered, instead of waiting to do it when the user clicks Save and Close in the questionnaire. I'm going to then use this approval trigger in my template by spanning my approver ID variable. And that's because we only want our user to select an approver from a list if the employee is earning more than $100,000. Now I'll create another computable in the unallocated variable section of my questionnaire. And this one is going to be called full-time true false. Again, it's a computable. And this time my computation is going to be employment type is full-time. Again, I'm going to check my Save in Session checkbox. I'm now going to again span my approver ID variable with my full-time true false computable. And that's because we only want an approver to be selected from a list if the employee works full-time, and my full-time true false span is sitting inside my approval trigger span, because we first want to know if the employee is earning more than $100,000 to trigger our approval step applicability. And then finally, for this row of text here, I'm going to include another span using the only on input function. And what that will do is it will prevent any text being outputted into my document here, but it will still ask the relevant questions in the questionnaire so that my approval process can be triggered. Next, I'm going to create another computable, which is going to generate my list of users for the user to select the relevant approver. So this time, my computable will be called approval comp. And in my computation tab, I'm going to generate my list of users. So I'm going to explain as I go what I'm doing here. I'm creating a list of users in the system. And then I'm going to separate my next rule with a comma. And what I want to do here is convert my approver ID variable into a text output. So to do that, I do toString, and then I insert my approver ID variable. Again, clicking Save in Session so that my computable operates as the questionnaire is answered. So again, I'm creating a list of the list of users in the system, and I'm converting the approver ID for each user to a string, being text. I need two more computables for my approval process in this template. So I'm going to again create a new variable here. And this time it's going to apply for part-time employees, where part-time true false is true. So again, my type is computable. And in this case, my computation will be employment type is part-time. Again, clicking Save in Session. And then my final computable is going to apply when my employee works on a casual basis. So my computation in this case will be employment type is casual. And then again, check the Save in Session checkbox. I now have all the variables I need to set up my approval process. So I'm going to just run my usage analysis, make sure there are no errors in my template. I'm going to highlight the markup in my template to make it more visible. I'm going to, in my template properties, I'm going to update my version number so that I can upload after the previous version of this template, which was made live. And then I'm going to upload my template into my Contract Express environment. Now I'm going to go back into my Contract Express interface. And I'm going to find my employment agreement template in my list of templates in the Templates tab. I'm going to click on the template name so that I can access the template details. I'm going to make sure my template is set to live, and I'll save that. And then I'll make sure it is shared with the appropriate users, and that looks fine. So now I will again click my approval steps option under the workflow heading in the left-hand panel. And you can see that no approval steps have yet been set up for this template. So I'm going to add my approval step by clicking the Add Approval Step button in the top right of the screen. My unique name for this approval step is going to be Employment Contract over 100,000. In this case, I want my approval step to automatically start when the questionnaire is completed, and I want my approver to be able to edit the questionnaire. This approval step is always going to be applicable, so I can leave this option as it is. Then under my required heading, which prompts the approval request to be sent to the approver, I'm going to select dependent on rule below. And my rule is going to be employee salary is greater than 100,000. So my approval becomes required if the user has entered an employee salary of more than $100,000. Now I can set up my approvers. This time I'll be configuring data-driven approvers. So I'm going to leave the default approvers section blank. And I'm going to click on the Add Data-Driven Approver button. My first approver is going to be required to approve requests where the employee salary is more than $100,000. So my applicability has been required. And it's going to apply when the employee works on a casual basis. So when casual, true, false is true. My approver is going to be a user, so I'm going to leave this drop down as it is. And I'm going to start typing in my approver's email address. And then I'll select my approver from the list. I now need to add a second data-driven approver. And this time it's going to be for employees who work part-time. So when part-time true false is true. My approver will again be a user, but this time it will be a different user. Now I can enter my final data-driven approver, who is going to be required to approve requests when the employee works full-time. This time I'm going to select my variable option here, and the variable that I inserted into my template, which will generate the list of users in the system to select from, is approval comp. So I'll choose that as my answer. I can now set up my notification emails. So in this case, I want to add a variable to my subject line, which is going to be the approval title. And I want to also insert, employee name. So my body text is going to be, please review and approve this request. I'm going to include my employee name in the notification email to my approver by inserting my employee name variable. And I'm also going to include the employee's salary amount by including my employee salary variable here. I'll then move on to create my forwarded request notification. And again, I can copy by clicking Control-C and paste by clicking Control-V from one notification email to another. In this case, I'm going to want to include forwarded in my subject line. Then I can set up my approve notification, again with the same subject. And this time my body text will be, this request has been approved. And then finally, I can set my reject notification email up, again with the same subject line. And my body text this time will be, this request has been denied. Now my approval step is complete and I can scroll to the top of the page and click the Save button. Now I'm going to run a test of the questionnaire so I can test my approval process. So I'm going back to my template details screen and I'm testing the latest version. So I'm going to quickly answer my questionnaire using some answers that I've previously input. And remember that my employee salary needs to be over 100,000 in order to trigger my approval step applicability. And I'm going to choose full-time as my employment type. You can see that my approver ID variable has now appeared. And I have a search user button here, which I can click on, which will allow me to start typing in the relevant manager who I wish to approve this document, start typing in their username. And it will give me a list of users available in my Contract Express environment, including these characters. I can choose any one of these as my approver and then click the select button. Then I'll save and close. So now on the document details screen, you can see that under the approvals heading, my document is waiting and my document status is awaiting approval. The approval process has started automatically and there's no request button for the user to click to start the approval process. The reason that the approve, reject, forward and grab buttons are appearing here is because I'm still logged in as an admin user who has access to all functionality. The notification email has automatically been sent to the manager I have selected, and I can confirm which manager this is by clicking the arrow to the left of the approval step name. The manager will then receive their notification email and will be able to approve, reject or forward the document as I demonstrated earlier. And I'll go to that manager's email inbox to check this in a moment. Now I'm going to start a new questionnaire using the same template. By testing the latest version again. But this time I'm going to select that the employee is a casual worker. So you can see that my approver ID question does not appear this time because it only applies where the employee works full-time. Once I've completed my questionnaire and I'm taken to the document details page, you can see by clicking the arrow beside the approval step name that this time my approval request has gone directly to the approver I set up in my approval step rather than me having been able to select the approver from a list. So if I go into my inbox for my approver, I will be able to see my email notification when it's received into my inbox as the approver. And the same will go for my original approval request where I selected my approver from a list. When you do select your approver from a list, it can come through, it take a little bit more time to come through, but in this case, you can see that it has come through here. And I've got my employee name, my employee salary, and I'm able to click on the link to access the document detail screen and either approve or reject the request. So and you can see also that my approval title has been entered in the subject line and my employee's name. So I'll once again start a new questionnaire. By using the same template. But this time I'm going to enter an employee salary amount that's less than $100,000. So I'm going to enter $99,000 as the employee salary. And you can see this time when I select my employment type as full-time, I'm not being asked for the approver ID to be chosen. And that's because my approval step has not been triggered because my employee salary is not greater than $100,000. When I save and close my questionnaire, you can see that this time my document is marked as compliant and no approval process has been triggered. My document is available for download. So that completes my session for today. I hope you enjoyed the session and found it useful, and thank you for joining me.